radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark. Today is Wednesday, January 6, 2016. I think that's kind of a magical day, 16 and 1/6, you know. So welcome to our radio show. And as you know, Wednesdays are the days when I typically interview activists and healers and people that bring us information about social engineering and, other things that they're doing to help us learn to live in the age of fission. This week, I actually have scheduled a citizen of St. Louis. We were not able to connect over the holidays, so I decided to use today's show to interview a citizen of St. Louis who reached out to me and wanted to share her information. We have with us on the line Wendy Lumetta, who is a woman who grew up near Coldwater Creek. I'll let her tell her story. But I really appreciate her willingness to speak out and share. So welcome, Wendy, to the show.
Thank you so much, Lonnie, for having me and for highlighting this issue. It's very important, so I can't tell you how many people appreciate that.
Well, that's good to know because, I live in Oregon, so I'm not in any way related. I don't have any relatives there. The only people I know in St. Louis are the people I've reached out to as a perfect stranger and said, hey, you want to talk on the radio? So I really appreciate people's willingness to share because and this is one of the things I really do want to bring up. You made a comment before we were on the air that you didn't want to misspeak, that you are not an expert. Well, look, this is exactly how the technologists and the nuclear industry want us to believe. Walt Disney was hired by the nuclear industry to sell us the peaceful atom. And I would suggest everybody go to YouTube and look up Peaceful Atom, Disney's Peaceful Atom. Watch that 15-minute cartoon again. And you can see a lot of planting the seeds of this concept that I'm not an expert and we have to trust the nuclear priesthood. There was actually a scientist named Dr. Alvin Weinberg who gave a speech about we now live in the age of the nuclear priesthood, that it is the nuclear industry has the responsibility of protecting humanity for all time in the future because nuclear radiation lasts for so long. And in my view, they have 100% failed, but that's besides the issue. We have all been gaslit into believing that we just don't know, we don't understand. Gaslighting is a term that came out of a movie from the 50s. And basically, it's this. Let me read to you what the Wikipedia says. It's not the best citing, but it's a really good term. It says gaslighting is a form of mental abuse in which information is twisted and spun, selectively offered to favor the abuser or false information is presented with the intent of making victims doubt their own memory, perception, and sanity. Instances may range from the denial by an abuser that the previous abuse incidents ever occurred, up to the staging of bizarre events by the abuser with the intention of disorienting the victim. So I think that speaks exactly to what's gone on in St. Louis. And in my view, Wendy, you are an expert. Why don't you share with our listeners where you grew up and what you believe were the effects of what happened to you?
Well, thank you very much, Lonnie, actually, for explaining that. I was unfamiliar with that term, and abuse is exactly what is happening in this situation. I grew up in Florissant, which it was kind of an almost nirvana type of childhood in that the Florissant means Valley of the Flowers. It was a green area where children played in the backyard, played in the creek frequently behind their homes. And as it turns out, we find out decades later that now it has been confirmed that pollution has gone through Coldwater Creek in the form of war weapons waste that was processed at the Mallinckrodt plant in downtown St. Louis. As it turns out, St. Louis has a terrible legacy of nuclear and radioactive waste and also other harmful waste. There are a total of 5 sites around the area, including the downtown site, the Weldon Springs site, the Westlake landfill site, Coldwater Creek, and then also the vicinity properties, which are all the roads that lead from Mallinckrodt to where they ended up dumping, and in Westlake's case, illegally dumping this radioactive toxic waste.
Would you repeat those areas again for me?
Sure. The areas are the downtown site, which is where it's actually a large, it's the Mallinckrodt plant that originally processed the uranium for the World War II and Cold War efforts.
That's in downtown St. Louis? I had not heard of that site. That's downtown St. Louis?
That's downtown St. Louis.
Oh my God.
And besides that, it's kind of on the north side of the city, and what's called the vicinity properties are the transfer routes, which came from when, they stored as much as they could on site downtown, and then they had to start transferring it, and they transferred it over to the airport, and then also to a site called the Hazelwood Interim Storage. So those areas were at the headwaters of Coldwater Creek. And so when these some of it was contained in 55-barrel drums. They have pictures online that you can see through the through the Facebook sites that show the corroded drums that had leaked out all into the creek. And then as a result of the population boom in the 50s and 60s, all of the areas that had previously been farmland were regraded and turned into neighborhoods right on top of this polluted radioactive creek.
Well, listen, let me just make a comment about that. That was farmland. So they dumped radioactive waste right next to where we were growing our food.
Growing our foods, growing children.
Well, then we put people in there. Like, this is one of the things, and in fact, I plan on Friday, I am going to make some public phone calls again to our elected officials on the air. I think it puts a lot more public pressure than me just calling them up as an individual. I am going to call them. But this is the thing I said the last time. You know, I live in the Northwest. We have Hanford Nuclear Dump Site. We would never in a million years dream of expecting the people in Washington to live within a mile, 5 miles of the nuclear Hanford waste dump site. And what's gone on in St. Louis is just as toxic, if not worse. I mean, it's to me, it speaks to the grotesque greed and lack of humanity by the governors, all of the governors, every governor that has ever sat in the governor's house in Missouri has known about this. This is not an accident.
No, it's been decades now, and I'm really glad you brought that up. That was the one point that I wanted to make to listeners today. I've already made my series of phone calls today. I talked to Andy in Senator Roy Blunt's office. I talked to Allison in Senator McCaskill's office. This was their D.C. offices. I also spoke to Sam in Governor Nixon's office. These are people that need to be called on a daily basis to see what else are these senators and governors working on that is more important than the human rights violation and loss of life and health of the people that are living in the surrounding area. I also have their phone numbers, which I can do at the end or now. But
well, let's do that both. Let's do it both, because some people might listen at the end. So I'll remind you at about 10 till. But let's give out those numbers right now. That's very, very important.
That would be great. Thank you. Senator Roy Blunt's D.C. office telephone number is 202-224-5721. Senator McCaskill's telephone number in D.C. is 202-224-6154. And Governor Jay Nixon's office is area code 573-751-3222. And these are the elected officials that should be helping through this.
That's right. And, you know, Governor Nixon was actually handed signatures, more than 12,000 signatures of citizens that want to have Westlake considered an emergency. And he has done nothing because he has been told to sit down and shut up. He's following orders quite well. And I think we need to call him and give him the courage to stand up. This is the thing. People in America, you know, we have been trained through the gaslighting to just be passive, to just say, you know what, it doesn't matter. This is why we have a very low turnout rate. This is why we don't get people actively engaged, because everybody believes that whatever they're going to say doesn't matter. But you know what? It does matter. It does matter. And our votes are more important than money, because money is not what happens in the election. When we go to the ballot box, we're not depositing quarters in the box. We're depositing our votes.
That's exactly right. I have told all of the elected's office, you know, when a crime is being committed against me here, I'm being assaulted on a daily basis. My nose, my senses, my health is being impacted on a daily basis. Who do I call to enforce the law against hurting me? There's already clean air and clean water laws that are supposed to protect people from this, and these politicians, I'm sure, are getting paid a lot of money to turn the other cheek and let these things happen.
Well, you know, one of the things that they do is they stand on the quote, and I'm reading this in Dr. John Goffman's books. This is why on my YouTube channel, Nuts for Art, that's NUTZFORART, I have a YouTube channel, and I have been reading Dr. John Goffman's books because it is valuable information. He was are you familiar with him?
I'm not.
Yeah, most of us weren't, and to be honest, 2 years ago, I never heard of him. I didn't know who he was either, but he was a nuclear scientist who worked in the Manhattan Project and was hired by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I think then it was called the Atomic Energy Commission. They changed their names around the 60s when the catastrophe in St. Louis became known. They got in trouble, so they changed their name to the NRC, but it's the same people. So he was hired by the government to basically study the negative effects of radiation. And his job specifically, him and Dr. Arthur Tamplin, was to show that radiation was not actually harmful, that we could actually live with it and it might be beneficial. That was his first order. The second order was, if it's not beneficial to humans, show us that it's not that harmful. The third thing, and the worst thing, was that it is definitely harmful. Every test they did showed that there is no safe level of radiation. Every test, every scientific study done with animals, and the studies that they have studied of humans who have been affected, have shown no safe level of radiation, and the radiation allowable standards that they picked a number out of the hat. I could explain that to you, but I'll save that for another day so you can share your story. But the way they picked the numbers was literally out of a hat, and the NRC, the Atomic Energy Commission, now allows for every 2 rads in the air for a population of 2 million, we know that we're going to get 32,000 cancers and 225,000 birth defects. So our government has adopted an attitude that the negative effects of radiation, i.e. mass death, mass birth defects, is worth the benefit of nuclear electricity. It is unconscionable, but this is why our elected officials, when we call them and we're trying to get answers, they're like, it's perfectly legal. There's no problem. So,
and that's why we keep needing exposure, like the exposure that we're getting on this show, to tell people, please don't fall for this. I was actually unfamiliar with the term gaslighting before you explained it, but that is just exactly what is happening, is abuse of power in the system. And so I agree. I would encourage all listeners to engage with all levels of their electives and try to get meaningful answers or replies from them and pressure them into, asking them what else is on your schedule that is more important than the human lives at stake that we're talking about here.
Exactly.
There's nothing more important. So we need to collectively put our heads together and figure out what to do. And the bottom line is that Republic is responsible. They actually started the fire, probably so that they can dump future trash there.
What? Tell me that again. That's a new bit of information. Say that again.
Okay. Well, that's speculation on my part. I probably shouldn't go there. But,
yes, you should. I don't mind that.
Okay. Well, this fire, it broke out because, and I'm talking about the thing that they refer to as the subsurface smoldering event. It's the fire that's been burning for 5 years.
Okay.
And actually that was initiated because they did not follow the best practices of the industry. And that's part of the topic of the lawsuit that Attorney General Chris Koster has with Republic. So it's difficult to get some people to discuss this issue, but the bottom line is Republic did not do the right thing to begin with because they didn't follow their own best practices. They let this fire start. They have had other fires in other landfills in other states, and this is how they take care of them. They let them burn, and they let it go at the taxpayer's expense. That's their MO. So
that is their MO, because that caveat is the last part of your phrase, the taxpayer's expense. We are legally bound to pay for it because of the Price-Anderson Act.
Yep. So they know that they have a loophole, and we need to show the politicians that are elected to protect us to understand that we know about that loophole. We don't have to be experts or any other type of credentialed individual to figure out that our air and water are being polluted. They're not doing anything about it for decades at a time. And it's really, you used the best word I could think of, and that's unconscionable. It's really difficult to wrap my head around the fact that we're talking about human lives that are being dealt with in such a cavalier way.
Well, not just human life. It's human lives, not just our lives. It's our future, because we know for a fact that radiation exposure causes people to become sterile, causes birth defects, and many of the birth defects and the sterility do not show up for 3 to 4 generations. Which leads me to your personal story. If you don't mind, I was actually kind of stunned right before we got on the air when I referred to you as a mom. I wanted to know, and you're like, no, I'm not a mom. So why don't you share with us what you believe are directly related negative effects of having grown up at Coldwater Creek and Florissant?
Well, certainly, there's no question. Actually, 2 of the original Coldwater Creek admin, Kim Stone and Janelle Rosen, we all lived within, I would say, probably about 1.5 miles of each other. Janelle lived on the other side of New Hallsbury, and Kim and I lived in the same neighborhood. And within I know that you interviewed her the other day, and I'm sure you'll probably remember that she is the one that lost her son to an incredibly rare brain tumor. In that same neighborhood, and I'm not talking about a very big neighborhood, but there was a golf course behind it, and the creek ran all the way through it. There was another man at the end of the street that was a neighbor. He died of that exact same brain tumor. Up the street was a childhood friend of mine and schoolhood mate of mine that died before age 40 of liver cancer. She had 3 small children, and liver cancer normally affects Asian men in their 60s. So very unusual for her to have something so crazy like that.
Even that phrase, it affects Asian men in their 60s, I'd really love to look at that scientific study. I'm sure that's related to World War II. So anyways, I digress.
I don't have the reference for that. So
I know.
No,
you can reference it. Look, this is not a show of experts, and this is one of the things, and this is why I really appreciate your willingness to discuss your personal story, because our government has intentionally not kept track of the affected population, has intentionally not kept track of who has cancer, what type of problems this has caused, the genetic birth defects. We have a medical system, as Kim highlighted the other day, that is grotesquely inadequate in trying to track the causes of population diseases and cancers. So I have no problem with us, because this conversation that we have and your story that you're going to share is going to force our elected officials to change the legislation. That's what we need. We need them to not go on the legislation that was created 70 years ago to protect the nuclear liars. And that's what they are, is nuclear liars. I don't call them an industry. They are murderers in my view. And I think the Price-Anderson Act, which indemnifies them, is a crime against humanity. And our government needs to rethink all of that policy. And the Department of Energy needs to really own up. Our government, it's time for our country to grow up. So please, I digress. Let me apologize to you. Please continue with your story.
No, not at all. Actually, I was just thinking that it would be helpful for you sometime, if you could, to get Byron DeLear on. He's an excellent speaker. He's very knowledgeable on this entire subject, and he can go a lot more in-depth into a lot of the more technical aspects. But what I can do is give you my personal testimony, and, that is that my father is passed away after a very long and terrible struggle with cancer. I found out that I had a tumor when I was 31 years old. I should also say that I was born with a congenital birth defect, a total neural right-sided deafness, and now my left ear is fading, so things aren't looking too good there. But I've just had lots of allergies, thyroid problems, Graves' disease, and then, like I mentioned, I didn't mean to be alarming about it or anything, but it's correct, I'm not a mom, and that is after a very long and difficult and expensive struggle to find out the answer to that question.
And what was the answer to that question?
The answer to that question is there is nothing they can do. They basically have no answer. We have spent tens of thousands of dollars on something called ART, which stands for Artificial Reproductive Technology. And I've consulted the top physicians and had very invasive procedures and surgeries, and I am unable to conceive.
Wow, I am sorry that, I'm sorry that you're unable to conceive, and I am really sorry that you had to waste tens of thousands of dollars because our government has known, and frankly the medical industry ought to have known. They do know that radiation exposure causes sterility. It is, and in fact the babies in utero are the most affected. It's very interesting. John Goffman, his book Poison Power, And I actually read a book by him, my first book. I thought it was a joke, actually. But he wrote the title as a warning to what would happen if we pursued the nuclear path. The title of the book was called Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution. And in there, there's plenty of great, from scientific data, he has lots of big fat books with scientific data, to these other two books that I'm reading, The Poison Power and Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution, to give us kind of a general idea of what is known scientifically about nuclear radiation. And one of the things that they knew very early on, Linus Pauling won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work on how radiation causes severe negative effects on babies in utero. And children are especially affected. Baby girls are most affected. Young people under the age of 18 and women, especially under the age of 25, are the most affected population. So the nuclear industry, with complete disregard for the harm it's causing to our children and to our future, have proceeded along in our government because they wanted to have nuclear weapons. Let's be clear. It's not about nuclear electricity. It's about nuclear weapons. Our government decided to have worldwide domination. It was worth the risk of polluting our entire country and harming the population. And people like you who grew up in an idyllic setting. Like, honestly, your life was beautiful. You had a great life. You had no idea. You grew up, you were sterile when you grew up. You had no reason. Look at the money you and your husband have wasted finding this out. Like, you could have bought 5 houses, you know what I mean? Like, you could have gotten quite rich off the money that you invested just trying to have a baby. It's
well, and even worse is just the heartbreak of knowing that I'll never have a child of my own. This is something that there isn't a price tag for it. So
that is so true. That is so true. And
I don't want to get mired down in my own story, because actually when I think of other people that have lost their children, I can't imagine anything that would be worse than having a child and then losing that child to a terrible, painful disease. And that is pretty much what inspires me. I may never have children of my own, but I feel that the work that I do on behalf of this issue is directly to protect them. That's what I'm interested in, is getting a government accountability for protection of children and making sure that the levels that they use aren't that of a 150-pound man. They need to consider that children, pound for pound, eat more, drink more, and respirate more than adults. So these things need to be taken into consideration. There hasn't been enough research done. And
that's not true. I'm going to stop you there. That is not true. There has been tons of research done. And you know why they're ignoring the research? And this is why every single current scientific study manipulates the facts. Because we know the reason they don't, John Goffman talks about this this was an intentional decision by the nuclear industry and our government, intentional decision not to use children's models, not to make separate models, because that's what they wanted as scientists. Look, we can't set up standards. We can't study these people. We have to, we know when they first started studying the nuclear harm, they realized that children were affected different than adults, women were affected different than men. So what the government did was made a decision to not study children and women and use the model of the strongest person that could resist it, which is a male of at about 150 pounds. And they did this. This was an intentional, it's part of the gaslighting. It is that whole conversation that we need more studies. Like, frankly, this is one of the things that got me actively engaged on this. When I saw that picture of that baby who died at 12 years old, some mother on a Facebook page put up a picture of her baby who had just, I mean, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, this is the reality. When scientists lie, people die. I have a protest sign that says that. When scientists lie, people die. And right now, we have an entire scientific community who have been colluded and coerced. They get paid for their silence. Every single scientist who deals with the nuclear industry in some way, even the anti-nukers who make money off of fighting the nuclear industry, have a vested interest in keeping the industry going. So this is where my focus is, to get us to change our conversation and stop regurgitating their lies, because it's, guarantee you what, Wendy, not true. We have plenty of studies. What we need to do is change the legislation. We need to accept our responsibility, change the legislation, and, you know, there's plenty of money to be made in helping remediate all of these problems.
Mm-hmm.
So
apparently not as much money as there is in letting it go, because of Republic's choice to have their fake coalition continue to lead lobbying efforts and spend their money that way, as opposed to cleaning up the mess, which is ultimately their responsibility anyway.
do you know about those lobbying efforts? Are you familiar with that? Can you explain a little bit to our listeners what's happening on that, about that?
Oh, absolutely. Republic Services, the billion-dollar corporation which is polluting St. Louis, they have a lobbying group. They're called the Coalition to Keep Us Safe, but we refer to them as the Coalition to Keep Us Sick, because that is actually what they're doing. They are paid lobbyists. They are employees of Republic who robocall all kinds of people in Missouri, mostly rural areas, and say, do you know how dangerous it is that they might truck this nuclear waste through your neighborhood? You know, please
You're
say no to
kidding.
this petition. So the people, oh no, it's quite. There are people that all over Missouri have said, we don't want this passing through our county. Well, they already have nuclear waste passing through their county currently. It doesn't go by truck; it goes by a sealed rail car.
Right.
And the Army Corps of Engineers has already removed, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million square yards of contaminated material. So it's already gone through the state of Missouri, but yet Republic is paying this lobby group to argue that this nuclear waste should stay in place because digging it up could be dangerous. They have flip-flopped on their message. They say, well, you know, yeah, it's you know, safe if you leave it there, but, you know, if you dig it up, then all these people could be exposed to this nuclear waste. It's like, no, it's already in the groundwater. It's already in touch with the air and the water that are upstream for the drinking water for St. Louis. So putting a lid on it isn't going to do anything. It needs to be excavated and dug up and shipped off in a safe way. So this coalition is, they make prostitutes look good because at least they are honest.
Wow.
These people have no price apparently that they're not willing to accept to continue to hurt and pollute and harm this neighborhood. People that don't even live around here. The woman who's the head of the group, who I understand was nasty to the mom's group on social media, she lives over in the Kansas City area, so she is in no way, shape, or form would be personally impacted by this. But yet she's the loudest Twitter user, and you know tries to convince people that it's harmful to move it. When the fact is that's the only safe thing to do is to move it. We need to get it out of here.
Is that the same woman that I read in an article a couple of weeks ago when I was in New Orleans? I read an article about St. Louis about some woman who was paid by Republic only $1,500 a month, was tweeting some mean remarks, you know, your 30-minute reality show is over, St. Louis moms, or something snotty like that. Is that the same person that you're talking about?
Yes, that's exactly the person.
So for $1,500 a month, she's willing to sell herself out for $1,500 a month.
Well,
$18,000 a year. $18,000 a year. She's willing to take the side of the nuclear. There must be some other story. She must have relatives. I mean, this is the thing that I am blown away when I'm reading what's going on with Republic Services and all the way that they're buying people out in St. Louis. Like the elected officials, I read that story about how they had given $50,000 to the state Republican committees. for the senators and $50,000 for the state representatives to the Republicans for their election campaigns or something like that. But for $100,000, the state Republican parties are willing to side up against their own constituents for to me, that amount of money is so infinitesimal. I can't even imagine that anybody would be willing to take the side of Republicans. Like this lady, $1,500 a month to demean people whose children are dying. Incomprehensible.
But unconscionable. That's the word. It's hard to believe that we live in a day and age where lobbying efforts like that are legal. Quite frankly, I'm very shocked and disappointed.
It is gaslighting. We are seriously, our culture, this is the thing, this is why I decided to read these books on my YouTube channel, because when I discovered and I came about John Goffman very backwards. Like I am just a regular person like you who came I became aware of the nuclear harm a few years ago when I had a dream about, I didn't even dream about Fukushima. I had a nightmare on May 5th, 2012, that the sky was all orange. It felt so real. I thought Hanford was on fire. I woke up just in a panic. I went to the internet and discovered, A, it's very difficult to find anything about nuclear, and B, Fukushima was still out of control. So that's when I started going, wow, man, and I started teaching myself, like most of us now are doing. Like, I'm 60 years old, and I 100% believed our government was protecting us up until 2 years ago. 100%. So
I have a lot of feelings about that, because I think that at some point when even Albert Einstein, who signed a letter to FDR suggesting that he investigate uranium before the Germans got control of it, he actually ended up going back on his feelings on that and said that nuclear was going to be, the killer of the world. So if we're not going to take Einstein's word for it, who are we going to believe? So no, nuclear itself has to go, and the entire lobbying industry that is entrenching itself with the energy lobby and the war lobby together. It's a very powerful government front that has to be confronted on all sides. It's mostly led by the Republicans, who want to keep the war machine going, and they want their nuclear power cheap. They know that anything else will be more expensive, and they don't want to pay for anything. So there is a Republican senator here in Missouri, Senator Kurt Schaefer, who wants to go for being the next Attorney General, but he is the attorney for he represents Republic Services side.
No way. Wait a minute. Are you an elected official? It represents Republic Services? Is that what you just said?
A senator from Missouri who wants to be our next Attorney General. And
represents Republic Services.
He works for Lathrop and Gage, who is the people who defend Republic Services. But at any rate, he also tried to introduce legislation that was going to demand that the people that live around the landfill not be able to sue for nuisance odors. And he's helping them by putting forward their agenda and the things that are most beneficial and profitable for them. So he's actually kind of an even worse prostitute than the woman who works for the coalition. Also, they use the name the coalition to compete with the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, who does wonderful things, who has done nothing but try to protect Missouri and the environment. And Kay Dry is the godmother of St. Louis and of Missouri. Her husband and her were the largest land owners and land donors that the state has ever had. And we lost Mr. Dry last year, and God bless him and God bless Mrs. Dry. for all of their help and guidance in wanting to help each other through St. Louis efforts. So I wanted to definitely give a shout out to her.
I interviewed her, actually. She was very sweet. She was very
She's
sweet. She was really, actually, she's been involved with Beyond Nuclear. Now, that is the Missouri Coalition for, what did you say? Say that name again.
The Missouri Coalition for the Environment. Now, see, there's a good guy. They're the people that are educating the public, that are watchdogs in D.C. and at the Jefferson City level, and they really look out for us, for our natural resources in Missouri. And this state coalition used the word coalition in their name so that it would try to make it sound like the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, because that's it's kind of like a right to work. The right to work is the right for overseas governments to own American companies.
Right.
And so the Republicans changed the wording of the way things are written to make it sound as though it's one thing when really it's another. So the coalition to keep us safe is bad, but the Missouri Coalition for the Environment is good. And that is just a little trick of Republics to try to dupe the people in St. Louis to try to get them to misunderstand what's happening. So
that's part of the gaslighting. That's part. And this, what's really is now where this senator Kurt Schaefer, you said his name. He is. Yeah. Does he live in Obviously, he does not live in St. Louis.
No, he's a mid-Missourian. I believe he's out of Columbia or somewhere in the more rural areas. But he has been very vocal regarding his extreme right-wing views, and he's highly unethical. There's obviously a conflict of interest with his work with the law firm that represents Republic, and him working for that, and being a Missouri state senator. There's just so many conflicts of interest, and the state of Missouri is actually so corrupt, and we need campaign reform in this state. I believe we're the only one that doesn't have it. So Missouri has a lot of problems besides the chemical radioactive fire landfill. We also have a lack of leadership to be able to handle it.
Well, for goodness sakes, it's interesting. Every person, I have adopted, as soon as I found out about, this is what I mean. I'm really a newbie in the, quote, anti-nuke activism, and I actually don't consider myself an anti-nuke. I am very against nuclear everything, but I never considered myself an anti-nuke activist. I consider it my duty as an American. This is a public health issue. This isn't about where are we going to store this stuff. This is about how are we going to protect the people of St. Louis from the harm that's already been caused. In my view, we need, and this is what I call, when I call Claire McCaskill's office, Roy Blunt's office, Governor Nixon's office, I want Governor Nixon to declare a state of emergency in all of St. Louis so that our government can set up funds to buy out the homes of every affected family. Frankly, in my view, the whole city of St. Louis needs to be evacuated. I think it is quite a catastrophic event that's gone on that has been understated, and the longer we ignore it, the more catastrophic it will be for the people of St. Louis.
You're too right. I can't agree more, with the exception of I would like immediate funds spent on 24-hour real-time monitoring from all areas, because to find out that something has an elevated level and it was a week ago, it's too late already. We need real-time testing to happen from the EPA or Missouri DNR or whoever's going to do it, the Army Corps of Engineers. We need to make sure that all of the potentially harmful chemicals and their combinations have been tested, because when these leachate pipes break open and spill, as they have already done several times, this nasty stuff comes out. Who knows what's in it? It's extremely toxic and dangerous. It's also corrosive to the pipes and things that it carries. So those things are ultimately going to fail as well. It's really scary that it's not being managed on a daily basis better, and that the citizens have to call in when things like a fire happens because the landfill owners aren't responsible enough to look at their property and see what's going on.
Look,
So,
it's not just the land. It's the entire nuclear industry. Dr. John Goffman, in his books that I'm reading, I keep referring to him because honestly, the studies have been done. He studied when he basically was drummed out of the nuclear industry when he didn't give the government the answers that they wanted. He and Dr. Arthur Tamplin refused to back down from their scientific studies that showed their recommendation was nuclear science is a thrilling potential idea, but we should not use it at all in the public arena until we understand how to manage the waste and how to protect the public from the harm that it causes. And when he gave them that answer, he was drummed out of the nuclear industry. So what he did was he went and he was very dismayed by the government's, after World War II, the government diligently went into Hiroshima and Nagasaki and took pictures and took names. Well, what they did when they realized the harm that had been caused, they destroyed a lot of the evidence that they had taken. They basically destroyed all the records for all the children, all the women. They never tested any of the women or children. They only tested men in a certain age group to come up with their so-called, this is what happens after we drop a nuclear bomb reports. So he studied on his own. When he got drummed out of the industry, he studied on his own. The people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he outlined this in his book, Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution. He was quite alarmed. That's why he wrote these books. He said basically the nuclear industry and the United States government and the United States military deny radiation causes harm and underreport the negative effects by 90%. That's what they have been doing since the beginning. Underreporting the negative effects of I call it the 90% rule. I deemed it the 90 because every single elected official clicks their heels, says Sig Heil, and bows down to the nuclear cartel. Every single one of them. None of them have the audacity or the nerve. I mean, we have really been literally sold down the river by the nuclear industry. And, the shackles, the chains are on big. And what it really does require is that we use what liberty we do have, and that is with our voice, our votes, and force legislation to change and force immediate, and I mean within the next year, 2 years, immediate remediation for the people of St. Louis. We cannot afford the slow train here. People are dying, children are dying. People like you, beautiful people like you, are unable to have their own families. That has to end. This is a crime against humanity.
I couldn't agree more. I support your ideas. I have the books by Dr. Gossip written down and that I'm definitely going to be looking into. I don't think it's possible to have enough attention drawn to this subject, and yet so many people feel that it's overwhelming or scientifically impossible to understand. But I think that's where the government is really underestimating the Coldwater Creek and Westlake populations, because these areas in St. Louis, we're not called the Show Me State for nothing. It's because people here are educated and they don't have to have an engineering degree to understand when something chemical is harmful and, that it has the potential to be harmful to children. I think that the more people that understand that, even if they don't know all of the answers, like myself, and I'll probably never understand the different mathematical quantifiers and things that they use, but you're absolutely right. For as long as there is any additional radiation, that's not okay. We need to get rid of the uranium that was brought here for part of the war effort and clean up St. Louis and care about each other in our hometown. So. And here you are caring from across the country, so bless you, Lonnie, really.
Well, look, you know what, you guys, I really feel, maybe it's because I'm an older American, but I feel a very strong affinity we're one family, and there is no way I feel like it is imperative for us to change the conversation in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Energy to grow up. I mean, they were acting like seriously bullies when they created this industry, and they have done nothing like eighth grade bullies. This is why I refer to them as like, right now what they're acting like is kids who got caught smoking pot in the bathroom. You know what I mean? Like they need to just grow up. We need a conversation with like this gentleman, Mr. Kurt Schaefer. I mean, all he looks at is dollar signs. That he is driven 100% motivated by money. I guarantee you, he has never looked into the negative. Dr. Gilmedi, who is a scientist who studied nuclear pollution, the negative effects of radiation on animals. He has been testing beagles for over 30 years now, and it's really unconscionable. He picked beagles, but it's kind of sad. He's been torturing beagles for 30 years, trying to find a low level of radiation that causes no negative effects. He has not been able to find that. And as Dr. Goffman said in nuclear power, in every other industry, whenever there's a new substance that comes out, we do get scientists to use animal testing and compare it and make analogies so that we can project, so we don't have to use human subjects as the topics to figure out if a substance is harmful. The nuclear industry has refused to accept any scientific study comparisons for animals in relation to human beings. And in fact, Dr. Goffman, the last chapter I just wrote, it said, must we wait for the dead corpses? And he was saying, like, the nuclear industry is the only burgeoning industry where we basically refuse to look at scientific studies until we get a death count. We have to have people sick and dying before anybody in the government will even now, Claire McCaskill, Roy Blunt, Governor Jay Nixon, we have children dying. Literally 8, 9-year-old, 10-year-old babies dying in cancer clusters. Teenagers, bloody noses. There's that poor child that was on here a few weeks ago, teenage girl. All of her friends have bloody noses, and you know what that means? They have high levels of radiation exposure. Bloody noses are one of the first signs you get. So it's unconscionable. So look, Wendy, we have about 10 minutes left. I would like you to reread those numbers to Governor Jay Nixon, Roy Blunt, and Claire McCaskill again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Senator Roy Blunt, he is the Republican senator in Missouri, and his Washington, D.C. office telephone number is 202-224-5721. Senator Claire McCaskill is a Democratic senator. Her D.C. number is 202-224-6154. And then Governor Jay Nixon, his office is here in Missouri in Jefferson City, and that number is 573-751-3222.
And you know what? I would also add that people probably need to be calling the head of the Senate and of the Congress. And, you know, we could contact Mitch McConnell's office, which is at 202-224-2541. And let me pull out Paul Ryan's phone number. Paul Ryan's from Ohio, correct? So I have a printout of all of the representatives and congressmen's number on my desk so that I can call them every single day, because this is what we must put pressure on them. We cannot let them get away with just absolutely doing nothing.
That's right. I don't have a telephone number, but another key number to have, is it's Jim Imhoff from Oklahoma. He
exactly.
is the head of the committee that is going to be reviewing it. It's House Bill, I believe it's 4100, and Senate Bill 2306.
Well, go ahead. Do you have that number?
I don't have Senator
I have it.
Imhoff's
Let me look it up. He's a senator. Jim Imhoff is a senator. Isn't he from Oklahoma?
Yes, a Republican from Oklahoma.
Okay, let me find his phone number so we can give that out. Because actually, you know what will happen is you need to contact the Environmental and Public Works. That's the committee that he's on. But you could certainly call his office, and they will give you that. Ask for that phone number of the committee that he's on, and say, "Look, we'd like to talk to the committee for the Environment and Public Works office," and they'll give you that. Let's see, Jim Inhofe. His phone number is 202-224-4721. That's his D.C., Washington, D.C. office. And this is the issue here with these elected officials, and this is one of the things I've learned. It's not just about passing those bills. We also need to get the funding. Do you know that we only have $100 million earmarked to take care of all the fuse wrap sites that need remediation, which means, and in fact, they are cutting funding for that. They're trying to cut corners on remediating all of these problem areas. And so it's not just passing the bills. We need to force these things to get funded. We need to demand that they get funded so that we can. That's partly why it's all been done on the cheap, because they pass the bills they have great intentions. Yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But then when it comes down to funding and they go into the committees to hammer out the budget, they're like, well, let's cut a little bit here and cut a little bit there. And they always cut the funds when it comes to public health concerns, always. And so we need to push back on that. That's really these are big parts of the conversation. As Americans, as adults, we have a responsibility to understand how our government functions. The way it's happened is because we have not participated as a democracy. We have sort of sat back, watched television, listened to the radio, elected our officials, and just believed blindly that they were creating legislations and paths of legislation that protected our country. And nothing could be farther from the truth. We have been offered up to the money gods.
That's the country is officially an oligarchy, and the billionaires are running the show. So absolutely, please encourage your listeners to reach out to their electeds, and not just these electeds. Have them look up their local electeds. I actually have met with all of my local electeds, including my county council, and gotten them involved, gotten them behind this. So really, it's about people engaging anyone who doesn't know. Frankly, I can't think of a whole lot going on that would be more important than this chemical radioactive fire burning in St. Louis. But obviously, it's a big world out there, and people have the different things that they pay attention to. But this situation will not go away. It will not get better on its own. We'll only need to increase the pressure to these elected before we'll get any action. So please encourage everyone to make all the calls they can.
Well, that is exactly right. Thank you, Wendy, for bringing that up, because, the reality is, that fire that's happening. I live on the West Coast. Do you know how difficult it is for me to get any information, even on the internet, about what's going on in St. Louis? This is why sometimes I talk to people on the air, and I misstate information because I'm just regurgitating what the media says. We live frankly, this is how the oligarchs function, is they control the media. They control, what did Himmler say, Hitler's people, Goebbels. He said, if you can control the message, you can control everything. And that's exactly what they've done. And now they're not used to us paying attention. Unfortunately, people in St. Louis got aware of it through Facebook, through social media, and they started, because you guys are educated there, they started accumulating their own scientific data. So I found out about it. I am not going to let this go. I feel very, very 100% strongly committed, as if all of you are on my own children. I feel that strongly. I will not give up on this until we get immediate remediation. And my demands, yes, I may be naive, but I have high expectations, and I believe that we can actually move through this and create a different paradigm. But you know what, Wendy? We've got about 15 seconds left on the air, and I wanted to thank you for having the courage to come on and join us this morning.
I have enjoyed you thoroughly, Lonnie. Thank you so much for your time and attention to this matter. It means the world to me and many others. So thank you really from the bottom.